Controller Talk podcast presented by Danfoss North America. Our goal is to bring you information about using Danfoss controls in the supermarket and warehouse industry, specifically in the US and Canada. We're doing these twice a month for now. You can catch these podcasts wherever you get your podcast, and it's also available through the Danfoss Ref Tools app. For the video version, check us out on the Danfoss North America YouTube page. Search for Controller Talk to see our video collection. I'm Dave Yoder, along with Chris Brown. So Chris, you got a new toy out back, I see.
Yeah, it's lots of fun.
7,000 pound toy? 8,000 pounds.
Closer to 8.
All right.
According to the shipping documents, at least.
Okay. Yeah, on the YouTube version, we'll put up a picture of the what we're kind of calling the Mobile Training Unit version 2.0 for CO2.
Yep. Yeah, they did a little bit of an internal reveal of it earlier this week, and I saw there was already pictures of it up on LinkedIn. So
Yep.
some people may have seen it on there already too.
That's right. Yep. So what's different about it in a nutshell over the first one?
One of the big things is this one has our Bach compressors on it. So
Right.
we'll be able to showcase customers, technicians, our Bach compressors. They'll be able to see them. We have the ejector on here. We did have an ejector on the previous, but this has low pressure, high pressure, and liquid ejector modes that we can all showcase.
Okay.
Those are probably two of the bigger things. The controls have been upgraded. It has the 800A on it, and the 782A on there as well.
Yep.
So
A CC55 case controller.
Yep.
Yep.
We may do some updates to it somewhere down the road here to get some of our line components in there that we didn't have available at the time that this was all being built. I mean, oil level regulators and just little things, ball valves we may be adding in as well to showcase. So. Yep.
And then we'll basically take it on the road as needed and that sort of thing.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Yep.
No, looking forward to being able to use it. Big Red was that. It was big. It was a monster to ship around. This one's 8,000 pounds, but it's still a quarter of what the old one was. So hopefully moving the thing around makes life a little easier. And yeah.
If only we could just UPS it around or something.
There you go.
Yeah. But it's still mobile. That's
Yep.
why they call it the Mobile Training Unit.
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, so there was a recent request to talk about how to save files in the 800A controller and the Pack controller. And once you see it done, you think, oh, that's no big deal. But if you haven't done it before and may not know all the options available to you, then you may not know how to do that, and people just want to find out.
Yeah.
And there's, especially with the 800A, there's multiple options there on how to back up the controller. And like anything else, backups are good because you never know when something weird is going to happen or a sprinkler is going to break in the compressor room and a controller gets washed. Chances are the controller is going to need to be replaced and then reprogrammed.
Yep.
And reprogramming it by hand in memory is going to take hours versus about 10 seconds for a file reload. Especially
if it's 3 a.m. You don't want to be
that's the only
figuring
time
that out on the fly.
That's right. Yeah. So first we'll talk about the 800A, and there's a few different options here as far as that goes, but probably one of the easiest options is to use the USB where you can plug in the USB. There's a little door to the right of the display. You open that up and there's 2 ports in there. You can use either one. And when you plug in the USB, you'll see at the top of the screen there's a little symbol there. Kind of looks like a tank in a way, like an upright receiver in refrigeration terms.
Yeah.
And it looks empty, and then you plug in the USB, and then it looks like it goes full, and that's how you know that it recognizes it. And then you can tap on that USB symbol, and then you get a menu, and then one of the things it'll let you do is do an export on your database.
Yep.
So it's key to understand that the 800A is the point of reference, and then if you want to save it, you're exporting that from the controller. So you could be exporting it right to the USB, or you could be exporting it to your PC, depending on how you're connected, and we'll talk about some of those options. But you're exporting it to a different device, and then On the controller, it will create a file name based on the date and time.
Yes.
And then when you save it to your laptop, then it'll allow you to stop and give it a name.
And I will suggest when you're removing the USB from the controller, that same drop-down menu has an option at the top for eject device.
Yep.
I usually could have cared less about using that option and just unplugged the thing.
Right.
But I've had a couple job sites recently I was on where I just pulled it out instead of using that option first. And when I put the USB in my computer, I realized the file wasn't fully there.
Ah.
Put some extra characters at the end. So I
Okay.
went back, did it the right way.
You're such a nonconformist.
Sometimes you want to test these things
Oh,
out.
gotcha. Podcast talking
There
points.
you go.
Gotcha.
But I went back, saved it again, used the eject option, and it showed up properly on the USB afterwards. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
See, I haven't had those problems.
it's because you do things the right way.
Correct. Thanks for noticing.
There you go.
But yeah, you're right. The Linux operating system in the background does want you to eject the USB now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll kind of yell at you if you don't do it on the screen.
Don't worry, I've got that one borderline memorized at this point. But yeah, you
Gotcha.
get a warning or a pop-up window if you just
Yeah.
pull it out instead of ejecting.
Yep. That's worth pointing out.
Yep.
So these controllers also have a Wi-Fi adapter built into them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the little symbol at the top of the screen that you can turn on and off. And then you can turn that on, and then it gives you information on the screen on how to connect. And then at this point, yeah, you can use a browser like Chrome or Edge and pull that up and connect. And then when you connect in with the browser, there's a little symbol in the upper left corner.
Yeah.
It looks like 9 dots. Some people call it the waffle. Some people call it the hamburger. There's all kinds of slang terms out there for it. But that's kind of basically a link to a utility menu. And then in there you'll find an option for export database.
Yep.
And that's another way you can save it. It'll save it. All these options will save it as a .dpk file. And I believe because of the security that's built into the controller, it's an encrypted file.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you can just open it with Word or something like that and see what's there. Yeah, that's not happening.
No concerns with number of characters though, like we used to have on some of the
Right.
older controllers. So you could put
Yep.
just about any piece of information you want in the file name.
Yep, true. Date, time, rack, store,
Yep.
version, all that stuff could be in there.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, so you have all those options, and then yeah, if you do happen to leave the Wi-Fi connected or turned on, it'll turn off on its own after 8 hours.
Yeah.
So that's really not an issue.
Yep.
And then yeah, if you happen to need that USB, let's say you need to load a file down the road somewhere, the units will look at all the DPK files on that USB and let you pick which one you want to load,
Yep.
which is a nice improvement.
It sure is. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about using Wi-Fi with the browser. You could also use Wi-Fi with StoreView Web, which is software that in most cases, if you're connected in through Wi-Fi, you're probably running the downloaded version of StoreView Web
Yep.
on your computer. And then for that one, there's other menus like configuration menus that let you do backups on the database that way.
And it's not to, and just for rehashing some things maybe from last season, but these terms are starting to overlap a little bit, especially for people that aren't using them on a regular basis. But StoreView Web is not the old StoreView desktop tool that we used to have with the 800.
Right, the big red screen.
Yeah. So if you were comfortable with, you had plenty of 800s out there and you got used to using StoreView desktop, and there's still probably some functionality out there that you're going to see, but getting in through RMT and trying to back up databases, that's not something you're going to do for the 800A.
Right, not an option there.
Yep.
Okay. And then, yeah, I mean, the other options you have for backing up a database on an 800A, if you have remote connection to it, is they could be backed up remotely. Essentially the same method to doing that, where you can back them up with a browser or StoreView Web.
Yeah.
If you are connected in remotely, that means you have connectivity to all the controllers typically.
Yeah.
And then StoreView Web will let you connect to basically the main unit, and then you can back up all of the controllers with that one connection.
Whereas the browser, you'd have to hit each IP separately and do it.
Right. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, so that's basically all of the options to save that database. And yeah, of course, if you save that database, you can email it to other people or whatever you want to do with it. You just have to kind of have some idea on that file what version was it saved in case somebody decides to change a controller or load it into something. You want to load it into, just like we've always had, you want to load it into something with the same software version or a higher one.
And this is all, we're talking PC, Windows-based things here. If you're trying to get in through a phone to do any of this, I know we've got some things with case controllers that we're capable of supporting now, but this is all things you're going to do through a computer, not a phone.
Right, not a tablet or something like that, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, now a Surface, a Microsoft Surface running some kind of Windows application, maybe.
Yeah.
You could.
And we've not necessarily tried out ourselves though yet.
Right. Those are mainly for connectivity.
Yep.
All right, so the other half of this, we wanted to talk about the pack controllers.
Yes.
So CO2 jobs are coming right along, and people are seeing pack controllers now. If, in case that's a new term to you, the pack controller is typically a separate controller.
Don't do it. This means they didn't listen to season 2. Just tell them to go back.
Oh, stop right there.
Nah, go ahead.
Yeah, you have to go back and talk and bone up on those. But yeah, the pack controller is going to be running the compressor functions and some of the extra valves and things like that. It can actually do quite a bit. So yeah, you could actually run a rack without the system manager at that point if you really had to. But there's also a configuration file in the pack controller, and that is worth saving because, once again, if something happens to the pack controller and you have to replace it, then you want to be able to load that in and spend that 15 seconds to reload the file versus a couple hours to figure out, what the settings should be, what the points are, all that good stuff. So that's where we would back up the file in the pack controller, which oddly enough is a file extension .bck.
Yep.
And and we use those for pretty much anything that's that kind of a controller, like a 750 case controller or one of these pack controllers.
Yep. Yeah, so this service tool software is separate from the tools you use for the system manager. It's dedicated for the pack controllers, and like you said, a few case controllers that we've had in the past. Maybe not anything actively today, but it's mainly something you're going to see used for the pack controllers, startup, commissioning, making some major changes, but then also what we're talking about here with backing files up and loading files in. So when you're looking at saving the BCK file, if you've connected in through Service Tool, and let's say you're on site, and you've got your USB cable that's coming from your computer going to the USB-B connection on the front of the pack controller. We're connecting in the Service Tool, and you hit that little yellow wrench icon at the bottom of the screen to get into your configuration menu. And then it's going to be all the way down at the bottom of that screen is an option to copy settings, I think is the wording it uses on that screen.
That's right.
So you go into there, and again, you may have to scroll down to find it, depending on the screen size you've got. But once you go in there, there's a blue square off to the middle left side of the screen to copy settings again, and you hit that, and you get a little pop-up window where your two options are backup or restore. So saving the BCK, we'd want to use the backup option there. That pulls the file out of or extracts the file out of the pack controller back to your computer. Similar to the system manager, you can give it any name you really want to. No real limit on characters. And that'll save that file onto your computer wherever you choose to place it. Restore would do the opposite. If you're looking to load a file in, you'd have that option there. And then there is also an option at the bottom that I've used in the past, others have too, to print the setup of the pack controller. So it doesn't have to be a physical copy. If somebody just wants a PDF that shows what all their settings were, you can use that print option too, and sometimes that can come in handy for different reasons.
Yeah.
So you've got that available. Service Tool does have the functionality or ability to be used remotely too. A lot of guys look at it as a local tool with the USB cable. But if someone has set up their network the right way, it would require tunneling through the system manager. So we're talking a pack controller that's communicating with an 800A. Port 1041's the default port and service tool that you've got to have open on your network to be able to access the pack controller through the service tool remotely. But you've got some abilities to set up a connection point within service tool, access these same screens that you'd be looking at remotely through the software, or locally rather, through the software remotely, and you can back up your files all the same there as well. So you got that option. And then keeping the files at the controller. So this really applies to both the system manager files and the pack controller files. That little door you alluded to that we've had with the 800 and now the 800A. Sometimes you'll see the USB. People are just sticking it right in there behind that door to keep it right there with the unit.
Right.
So that's not the worst idea. Guys, whether they're managing the files on their computer or going that route with the USB somewhere on site. But yeah, we definitely recommend to keep these files somewhere local in case you need them in a pinch, or somebody else that's going to be on site, and somebody else from your company maybe needs them in a pinch. With the system manager files, there's no reference there to a software version or a firmware version. So I think one of the suggestions we have, and something I know I've started doing recently too, is reference the firmware version of the controller when you saved it in the file name, because with both of these devices, the system managers and the pack controllers, it can be a little misleading because now we're seeing that both of those devices can accept a higher version of software from a database than what they might actually be at. So let's say we've got a system manager at 3.3 and you try to load a 4.0 database into it, and a similar situation with the pack controllers, it's going to accept it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work the way you expect it to, but it's going to accept that file, and it's not necessarily a situation you want to run with. You want to get the controller up to the file or version at or higher than what the database is at.
Yep.
So I think referencing software versions in these file names that you're saving now is a good practice to get into. So keeping them there, keeping them on your computer, reloading here. So again, it's kind of doing the reverse of what we described for saving. You went through the process for the system managers with the drop down on the USB or the fly-in window where you'll have that option from a computer. If we're in service tool for the pack controllers, then you're just going to that same screen that I mentioned before. And like I said, you've got the restore option in there. It'll ask you where you want to pick the file from and load it in. One of the things you will see, it's okay to in most instances at least, it's okay to load a slightly older version of firmware on a database for a pack controller into a newer version. So we're at 4.1 right now. If you loaded a 3.8 firmware database pack controller into that 4.1, that's okay. Mm-hmm. You will get a pop-up window telling you new settings that might be available in 4.1, what those values are going to default to. So that's a screen that can't hurt to glance over when you see that pop up. Gotcha. Maybe there's a setting in there that you want to go in and look at and adjust to what the default's going to put it to.
Okay. All right. So as far as service tool and saving files, not that difficult, but saves you a lot of time potentially down the road.
Yep.
All right. So Chris, I have questions for you. And in this part of the podcast, I usually have pretty ridiculous questions, actually, but there's usually a method to it. And I think you can confirm that I have not shared the answer or the question with you so far, right?
Never. I'm thinking we need to rename this segment to Get It Over With, Chris.
Oh, gotcha. Embarrass Chris, something like that, yeah. So, yeah, I have some statistics for you that are probably somewhat ridiculous, but there's a reason for them.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of wondering if you have an idea, when you back up a 800A, what's the typical file size on that file?
Small, relatively speaking, I feel like. You're talking under 100 kilobytes.
True. You went with the over-under kind of thing.
Let's go 50 to 60 is what's in my head.
Yeah, it's about 40.
Is it a little bit lower?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now it could be bigger depending on what's in the controller, but
yeah,
about 40 kilobytes is the typical size. So that means you can put a lot of files on one USB.
And if you're emailing them out, nothing necessarily it's going to get blocked just based on the size of it.
That is true. Yep. How about the pack controller? What size do you think those files typically might be?
They're kilobytes too, but I can't remember. Let's go. I'd like to think they're smaller than a system manager.
Ding, time's up.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, 80.
Actually, it's larger.
I see.
Yeah, it's like 590 to 600 kilobytes.
Some way that they're compressing that data is okay.
Yeah, but it's still, I mean, you could still put a lot of files on a USB.
You would just, without knowing, you would think the pack controller would be smaller, but
Right. Yeah. I know you sit around thinking about this stuff all the time.
I mean, I look at those files often enough. It would have thought that stuck, but obviously not.
Okay. Well, the important thing is that you didn't have the answer, so.
Hey, at least I'm consistent.
I'll give you that much. So, listener mail. Let's talk about that. So there's a couple of people have asked recently, one of them being Butchie. You remember Butchie from Baltimore? Yeah. He said he was charging a CO2 system recently, and his compressors were starting to run a little bit, but then he noticed that his medium temp suction reference kept dropping.
Yep.
And he's like, hey, what's going on here? It doesn't seem right. So as he's charging his receiver, he's not really up to where he wants to be yet, but the compressor started to run, and they kept running, and the target for those compressors kept dropping, and he would like us to address why that is.
Well, the pack controller is trying to be intelligent in that situation, and it knows on a normal CO2 system that there's no reason suction pressure should be higher than your receiver pressure. And obviously, when you're just starting a system up, a lot of those pressures are equalized. So depending on where you're charging it and those types of things, or in general, just the fact that they're equalized at that initial startup period. But the controller's trying to create some differential there by adjusting the set points for your suction versus where it sees the actual receiver pressure at. So it's not that anything's wrong. It's just that as receiver pressure builds up, as you put more charge into the system, you can expect to see your suction pressure target also rise along with that until it hits the point that you've got programmed in for your normal target.
It'll work its way back to normal
Yep.
as the receiver pressure comes up.
Yep.
But it always thinks that, is it a 15 bar difference by default where the succsion
Not bar,
reference?
15, maybe PSI, 15 bars.
Bar PSI. It's not exactly all the same, but but it knows that the medium temp suction should be running lower than the receiver pressure.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, the difference isn't astronomical.
Right.
I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there's some differential. I mean, we know oil, these types of things are the concern when you don't have that differential there.
Yeah.
And then just the general idea that you could be, if you allow it to drop too low, you could be allowing your compressors to run outside of their envelope somewhere that you could potentially risk damage. So.
Yep. So what I've been seeing is that we normally just turn off the main switch on the pack controller until we kind of have a pretty stable pressure in the receiver up around, let's say, 450 or something like that. And then you can turn on the pack controller main switch so that it can start doing its thing.
Yep.
And then as you boil off in the receiver, the pressure comes up a bit, you can let those compressors start up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Once you turn that main switch on, it shouldn't be too long before things start regulating. So 400, 450 should give you plenty of time to catch it.
Yep. Let the pack controller do its thing, and away you go.
Yep.
All right. Well, if you'd like to drop us an email with a suggestion for topics to cover or a question or comment, you can always email us at controllertalknorthamerica@danfoss.com. That's controllertalknorthamerica@danfoss.com. Thanks for listening. Our audio engineer is either Raul Garcia or Maria, depending on what day it is. And then, of course, the new guy, Josh, is still not here, is he?
Josh, mark yourself safe if you hear us.
That's right. Respond to us. So, yeah, the new guy, Josh, is still missing in action. We assume he's out there working somewhere. Maria's kind of doing everything here, making it happen, as usual. Until next time, for Chris Brown, I'm Dave Yoder. Stay cool.